Can you actually rewrite something that's been running since childhood? Or is knowing your pattern just a more educated way of staying stuck in it? One woman answered that question with 7 years of roller skates, fax machine brochures, and doors closing in her face. For 7 years, she went door to door trying to sell fax machines. Most days ended the same way: a closed door, a no. By her own account, she got turned down close to 99% of the time. Most people would call that the worst job a person could have. She didn't. She called it practice. Her name is Sara Blakely, and within a few years, she'd be a billionaire. But practice for what exactly? Knowing you can survive rejection is one thing. Actually changing what you do with money once it arrives is a completely different skill. Last episode, we talked about the money story you never chose. The one written into you before you understood what money even was. Knowing it exists was the beginning, not the end. Because here's the part nobody tells you. You can know your money script by heart, word for word, and still act it out anyway. Awareness doesn't erase it, it just means you finally recognize the handwriting. There's a reason for that, and it's not a willpower problem. You've probably heard it takes 21 days to build a new habit. That number didn't come from a psychology lab. It came from a 1960s plastic surgeon watching how long it took his patients to stop flinching at their own reflection after surgery. The real number, from actual research out of University College London, is 66 days on average. And the honest range is anywhere from 18 to over 250, depending on how deep the old pattern runs. And even then, the old pathway never fully disappears. It just goes quiet, which is exactly why an old money habit can come roaring back the moment life gets stressful, even years into doing everything right. So stop comparing your financial journey to the people you see on TV or the internet. Everyone's journey isn't the same. Yes, listen to their advice, but don't get discouraged if they made it in 2 weeks and you're still working at it 5 years in. The research backs this up. Some people rewire a habit in 18 days, others take 254. Same effort, same commitment, completely different timelines. So give yourself the real minimum before you decide something isn't working. Not 10 days, not 3 weeks, 66 days at least. And even then, some patterns will still be settling in months after that. So if rewriting a money script were just about knowing better, episode 1 would have been enough. It wasn't. Because knowing isn't rewiring, living differently is. So what does living differently actually look like the moment your plan falls apart in real time? Before the fax machines, Sara Blakely had a plan: follow her father into law. She took the LSAT. She failed it. Studied harder, took it again. She failed it a second time. The plan she'd built her whole identity around was gone. Here's the belief she could have walked away with: I'm not smart enough. Here's the one she chose instead: this plan didn't work. The job now is to find one that does. That one sentence is the difference between quitting at 20-something and building something at 30. She didn't just decide it. She let the door close on law school and walked toward whatever came next, which, for a while, was fax machines. Not because it was glamorous, because it kept her moving. There's something almost counterintuitive in the research here. Self-sabotage in finances is rarely really sabotage. Most of the time, someone isn't failing to reach a better future. They're unconsciously protecting the version of themselves they've always recognized as them. The brain, it turns out, rewards consistency with self-image more than it rewards actual success, which means a familiar failure can feel safer than an unfamiliar win. So she asked herself the harder question: what's my familiar failure? The specific, repeatable pattern she kept returning to, dressed up as a new attempt each time. Once she could name it out loud, it stopped running the show quietly in the background. She didn't let the story stay familiar. There is no success without failure. They go hand in hand. With failure comes lessons and adjustments. You get better because of what you didn't know that you learned. She didn't chase the same plan twice. She adapted, she pivoted, because the alternative wasn't safety. It was staying stuck defending a door that had already closed. But adapting the plan is only half the problem. What do you actually do with the money once it starts coming in? Before we get to her story, here's the one most of us actually need first. You probably didn't grow up under a system where banks and investors simply didn't exist. Most of us grew up somewhere quieter, inheriting sentences about money we never chose to believe, the way episode 1 laid out. I was just born with a bad hand. If I'd been born with rich parents, things would be different. I'll never be rich. Rich people just have more opportunities. We don't talk about money. You have to work yourself to the bone to earn it. You cannot rewire a belief you haven't identified. So before anything else, write it down. The actual sentences. Not what you'd say you believe, what you actually act like is true every time money shows up. Anastasia Soare's version of this was more extreme than most, landing in Los Angeles from communist Romania with $200 and no English. She went to the bank for something as simple as a credit card. They said no, no credit history, nothing to lend against. She was taught, like most of us, that money is something you protect. You save it, you guard it, you wait. Saving matters, it's the floor under everything else, the emergency fund that keeps a bad month from becoming a bad year. And for her, it was the only floor available. No bank would lend to her, no investor would fund an eyebrow business nobody thought could work. She worked 7 days a week, brows, facials, house calls, and saved $60,000 before she ever opened her own salon. But saving alone was never going to build what she wanted. She didn't stop once she had a cushion. Every dollar she made went back into the business. She even flipped houses on the side purely to generate more capital to reinvest. You can't save your way to wealth. You can only invest your way there. And for her, that meant treating her own reinvested labor as the only investor she'd ever have. Before she could change what she did with money, she had to unlearn what she'd grown up believing about it. In Romania, private business had been illegal. You spent only what you had because credit and investors simply didn't exist in that system. That belief traveled with her to America, where it became her greatest strength, not her limitation. And invest doesn't only mean money, especially if you don't have much of it yet. For her, it also meant investing in a technique nobody else had, studying the golden ratio, the same proportion artists like Leonardo da Vinci used to map ideal balance in a face or a body, and applying it specifically to eyebrows, mapping exactly where a brow should start, arch, and end based on a person's own features. That precision became the entire foundation of her business. This is where the brain quietly works against most people. It doesn't evaluate money in absolute terms. It sorts it into invisible mental accounts. The same $100 gets treated completely differently depending on which imaginary bucket your mind assigns it to. A paycheck feels protectable. A tax refund feels spendable. Neither judgment has anything to do with what the money can actually do. She never had that luxury of mental accounting in the first place. Every dollar had the same job: go back into the business. There was no extra, there was no free. She didn't ask, how do I protect this? She asked, where does this need to go? But there's a quieter trap that undoes this reframe before it even has a chance to work. It's not just failing to save or invest, it's spending to look like you already arrived. Look around and you'll see it everywhere. People spending more than they make, borrowing to appear as successful as the neighbor next door. And that neighbor might be doing the exact same thing. Looking wealthy, drowning in debt. Two households, both performing a status neither one has actually earned yet. She could have bought a new car the moment the business turned a profit. She didn't. She held on to an old $200 car for years, long after she could afford better, because every dollar a new car would have cost was a dollar not going back into the thing she was actually building. This isn't a personal failing. It's the water an entire society is swimming in right now. Everyone glancing sideways, calibrating their spending to someone else's highlight reel, when that highlight reel might be one missed payment away from collapsing. The mentality that quietly wrecks a middle class isn't laziness. It's living above a means you haven't actually built yet, spending toward a status you don't yet have the income to support. The shift isn't complicated to name, even if it's hard to live. Stop financing an image and start financing an actual future. Ask what you can genuinely afford before asking what it will look like to everyone else. That single reframe is the entire chapter. If you're realizing your own money script has been running quietly in the background this whole time, that's exactly the pattern we built the workbook for. Links below if you want to go deeper than the video can take you. But knowing how to treat money is still only half the equation. What happens when you don't believe you're allowed to be in the room where that money actually gets made? There's a belief that sits underneath almost every financial ceiling a person hits, and it's rarely about math. It's this: do I actually belong here? Here's the part that's harder to hear. People born into money aren't handed a better world. They're handed different mental programming, different training from birth in how to see what's in front of them. Growing up under a communist regime, Anastasia Soare hadn't been handed that training either. The opposite, in fact. Private business had been illegal. There was no version of credit or investor in the world she came from. When she arrived in America, the very idea that a stranger could lend her money against the plan she believed in was foreign to her. Because the opportunities aren't reserved for anyone. The same doors are open to everyone. The difference is most people walk past them without even realizing they were doors. Not because they weren't paying attention, because nobody ever taught them what an open door looks like. She had no credit history, no local reputation, and a boss who refused to let her build the service she believed in. So she rented her own room in a different salon and started over on her own terms. She had to decide before anyone else agreed that she deserved to be in the room. Not after the proof, before it. But belief was never a substitute for the work. She didn't walk into that salon unprepared and hope confidence would show up on its own. She'd already spent years studying proportion and technique until she could defend every choice she made about a client's face. And only then did she start believing she belonged there. Because by that point, she actually did. This isn't just a nice idea. In financial psychology research, the belief piece isn't secondary to the behavior. It's often the driver. People whose core money beliefs get directly addressed in treatment show measurable improvements in financial health and psychological well-being, even when the actual budgeting and discipline strategies stay exactly the same. The belief moved first, the bank account followed. She didn't wait to feel wealthy to start acting like she belonged in rooms full of people who were. That belief carried her from a single rented salon room to her own line of eyebrow products in 2000. A gift basket sent to a talk show host's production team turned into a spot on that host's year-end favorites list. And the orders didn't stop after that. The brand she built alone, on savings and reinvested labor, eventually reached a peak valuation of $3 billion. And she carried something else forward from that early rejection. Whatever she built from here, she wasn't going to just hand over the asset without the psychology behind it. Wealth research shows that most family money doesn't disappear because of bad investing or bad luck. It disappears because nobody taught the next generation the psychology and habits that built it in the first place. She wasn't going to make that same mistake twice. But belief and preparation still don't make the no's stop coming. So what do you actually do with years of sealed doors if you refuse to accept that they mean no? Which brings us back to those doors. 7 years of them, nearly all of them closing. Most people would tell you that's the story of someone who should have quit a long time ago. Sara Blakely would tell you it's the story of someone who understood something most people never learn. Rejection was never the opposite of a yes. It was the road to it. She stopped measuring each no as a defeat. She started counting them instead. Just data, not a verdict on who she was. A number doesn't have feelings attached to it the way a failure does. Every no she absorbed wasn't proof she was on the wrong path. It was proof she was still moving down the only path that was ever going to work. Closer, not further. She eventually left the fax machines behind. Not for a law degree, but for an idea. $5,000 of her own savings, no outside investors, ever. She self-funded the entire company herself for the next 21 years. By the time she finally brought in a partner, the business she built alone was valued at over $1 billion. She didn't rewrite her money script by thinking her way out of it. She rewired it by living differently long enough for the new pattern to become the automatic one. So can you rewrite your brain's money script? A woman with 2 failed law school attempts and a stack of fax machine rejections did it. A woman who landed in this country with $200, no English, and a bank that wouldn't even give her a credit card did it too. Neither of them had it easier than you. They just stopped waiting to feel ready and started living like the new story was already true. If this is the episode where your own script started to feel rewritable, subscribe. We post every 2 weeks, and this series isn't done. And if you know someone still waiting for permission to believe they belong in the room, send them this one. She was never rejected. She was just getting closer.